This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Hey, welcome to the Extra Point. I'm Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps in Discipleship pastor here at Southridge Church, and I'm with Pastor Anna Blake, our youth pastor, and we're going to dive deeper into Sunday's teaching from Unlikely Heroes. But before we really get into that, I want to make sure that if you haven't liked or subscribed to this podcast, that you go ahead and do so. That way you don't miss out on any new content. So this past Sunday, we were in week 2 of our series, Unlikely Heroes. And the first week, we kind of talked about how, God can use us. But the question comes for many of us, like, I don't know about that. Like, really, right. God can choose me. I'm not so sure. Like, do you know who I am? Do you know what I've done? All these questions start coming in. And so the other question often can be like, well, are you sure about them? Like, maybe me, but I don't know about that person. So Pastor Scott shared from Acts 9. He shared about a guy named Paul, and gave some background on how Paul was a persecutor of Christians. He was the one who went way out of the way to track these people down. And in this particular story in Acts 9, we see that it wasn't just like a really convenient next town over, a few miles away, but we're talking like over 100 miles away on foot at the time distance. And so Paul is this guy who comes in, has this radical transformation with God. And we kind of heard that like God doesn't count people out. He calls them out. So Pastor Anna, I would like to just hear from you. Like, have you ever felt like Paul or known a Paul in your life? And maybe what was that like for you? Or like if you had that instance where you felt like God was calling you out of something maybe more like different, or if it was somebody else, how that was for you to see.
Yeah. I know that I've been, thanks to God, been pulled into some uncomfortable situations that I had to kind of just step into and go, okay, I guess this is what we're doing. But as far as like really being called out, the one time that comes to mind specifically was when I was a teacher. I have a degree in education. I was using that degree in the field, and God presented an opportunity to step into full-time ministry, and I didn't have any kind of accreditation towards that in my scholastic history, but I had been saved at 15, gave my life to Jesus, started following him, involved with student leadership teams and involved at college campus ministries, stuff like this. And so when that happened, I did feel very like, this can't be for me. Like, there's no way this is the thing. But then, 8.5 years on the other side of it, knowing like, no, that was a moment. That was a moment where God was saying, you have to, this is going to be a switch up. Like, we're going to change things and it's going to look different. And so I'm grateful for that. I'm sure we'll get into this as we discuss like Ananias' role and different things, but I haven't always done things perfectly on that side of it either. Yeah. But when it comes to feeling that called out moment, I've experienced that. I've had the pleasure of seeing others step into it.
Yeah. Now I think for your story, it's a little bit different than with Paul, because Paul, when he has this encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, he literally fell to the ground. Right. And Pastor Scott said, a lot of times we have to be knocked down before God can stand us back up again. Yep. And, for me, I think that's more similar to what happened with me, because I knew I was called to ministry as a teenager. However, the church I was in, they believed a little differently in things, and the different traumas and things that I had experienced, I kind of just felt like there's no way that I can be used. So I had this feeling, but then also was like, well, maybe not. And so I just went the total opposite way. Yeah. And it wasn't until a point where I was really at a low, that things came full circle again. And I ended up in a church service where they're literally celebrating how they've been sharing the gospel, and had a moment of prayer for that. And I'm like, my friends are trying to get me to come up, where they're like, they're going to be prayed to continue to share the gospel every day of their lives, not just when like someone special is in town and urging them to. And I was like, there ain't no way I can go up there and pray. Like that was my feeling. I said, no, I haven't been doing that for years. Are you kidding me? Like, there's no way I can go ask for prayer for that. But in my seat, it was kind of that called out moment, or that moment where God really like just met me in that moment where, I said a simple prayer where I didn't think I could be used, but if God, you still see that in me, like, let me know. And there was one of the people that I'd waited on earlier that day right there praying those very things over me. And it was in that moment that I was like, oh, yeah, it can be me. Yep. And so I think, each of us have a little bit of a different story. Sometimes that calling out is less of a knockdown moment and more of a maybe a natural progression or changing directions. Yeah. But so along the lines of Ananias was the one who, was a Christ follower, a known Christ follower, where God says, hey, Ananias, I want you to go to Saul, go to Damascus on Straight Street, pray for this guy. He's praying to me right now. Go and lay hands on him and pray for him. And, Ananias has this moment of like, God, do you know who that is? Do you know who you're asking me to go to? And of course God does. But it's like, I love Ananias in this moment, because I think most of us naturally, like, we go there and God doesn't like rebuke him. He just urges him on again. Right. And Ananias ultimately becomes obedient to that and does that. And so we see that Ananias ends up ultimately having a part in what Paul ends up going to do, because had Ananias not been obedient, who knows how the story would play out. But so for you in your life, have you had an Ananias moment where you like question like, or maybe it was hard to be obedient, or we weren't obedient in it? Like,
I have something really specific. I feel like as a person, I'm a pretty patient and open person. I'm not... I think God has allowed me to have a personality that's not quick to judge, and that I'm really open to just hearing the whole story with people. One of the only times that I have not followed through with that natural build within me was when I started in full-time ministry. I had some past struggles that I faced working in the school system with families, and anyone who has families understand there are complexities. Parents are doing the best they can for their kids, and sometimes that can raise really tense moments with educators. I think that's probably a diplomatic way to say that. Like, there can just be trouble between teachers and parents, and I had just seen too much. And so when I first came on in ministry, I had a pretty strict, I don't need any parents to be volunteers mindset. You probably remember me saying something like this, like, I don't think that's probably the best setting for a parent to be in this space, like, because I want to create a safe space for students, and I want to be able to like express teaching them in a way that, but I also want parents to trust me. And it was like a really tricky place to navigate. And I remember a ministry friend of mine saying, some of the best volunteers that they'd ever experienced in teens and kids ministry were parents, because of the buy-in nature. And they gave me time to reflect and to think. And it was that God giving Ananias that, let me just urge you into this a little bit more. And as I, developed and was like, all right, let's see what happens, I guess. Some of the best leaders that we've had come through have been parents or family members. And I'm grateful for that, to have that experience. I'm grateful that God had grace with me in that. Yeah. I'm grateful that others had grace in that. But I also am like, in a weird way, thankful for the struggles, because there are probably some things that in leadership and in doing new things that ignorance is bliss. And at the minimum, that's something that I think about. Yeah. It doesn't have to be something that I act in, though. And so like that fear, the precaution can be, okay, that's in my mind, but it doesn't have to dictate how I act.
Right. Yeah. I think that is a good thought, that it can be a thought that you have, but it doesn't have to dictate your actions. And so it might make you a little more cautious. I'm sure Ananias was cautious going into that room.
I can only imagine.
I mean, you know what I mean? It might be like, was this really you, God? Like, is this a trap? I don't know.
It'd be like sitting down with a known murderer.
Yeah.
And you're going, well, I'm their type.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a tough lunch. That's tough. That's tough.
Definitely. But I think that it is really cool to say, like, to be able to look back or look, years down the road and be like, wow, I had a part in their story.
Yep.
And we obviously, like, we don't do it for that because, like, if it weren't for the story in scripture, I mean, we would have no idea. Yeah. But there's countless things like that where you could be an Ananias for somebody and maybe nobody knows about it. Yeah. And that's okay. Like, we have to be okay with that too. Cause there might be a thing of like, well, I think about the story that Pastor Scott shared with Nikki Cruz and David Wilkerson. Yeah. And it's like, had nobody known David Wilkerson was a part of that, like, or Nikki Cruz never gave David Wilkerson credit to say, like, he impacted my life to where I was able to come to Christ and, like, go on to do these things. I think that, there are those instances where something really big happens and the people do point back to that, but there's probably a lot of smaller moments where there's not pointing back. And I think, like, in your situation with youth ministry and parents, there's probably not a ton of, like, moments where there's like, hey, I really, like, when you have maybe a youth leader, a volunteer, lead another teen to Christ. Right. It's like you could in that moment be like, oh, I didn't get to do that. You know what I mean? Right. Or they're all excited about it and they're not saying, well, I had this opportunity because Anna allowed me to be here, and so I think that there's, in those moments, we have to be okay with that.
Absolutely.
Because that's not why we're not doing it for us.
That's it. Yep.
We're doing it for Christ and for the gospel and the kingdom to grow. Yep. And so I think that is something to remember in those moments of like, well, my obedience isn't for me. Yes. My obedience is for God. Yeah. My obedience isn't for them necessarily, but it's to God. Yeah. I know of a moment for me where I am like, where God was telling me to go and like give a message to somebody. And I was like, no way. Like, I remember literally arguing with God in the shower about this. And I was like, no, I don't want to go talk to him. I don't want to share this with him. No. Like, do you know what he's done? Do you know, like, all of this? And I'm like naming all the things. And so God has no clue and God knows exactly.
Yeah. God, in case you're not sure.
Oh, and I remember though being so convicted by it because God said, I do know, but you've been praying for his wife only and you've not even thought of him. And I was like, oh, right? Like, you're right. Yeah. And that was one of those moments. And, things are much better in that situation. And I don't know if it was I know that it wasn't only that message, but and I don't know where the future is going to go in that. But again, like I don't know where the future is going to go. You don't know where the future is going to go for some of those people. And we don't know in that moment of going and doing the same, being obedient to be an Ananias for somebody, for God. We don't know how it's going to turn out, but it is about that obedience and that act of faith to step out and say, well, I'll do this. I'll speak to them. I'll speak on their behalf. I'll pray for them. Yeah. I will give them an opportunity, whatever, like being obedient. And that is all you know in that moment. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really important because, yes, we can read the story and we know what's ahead in Acts. We know that yes, Paul wrote all these letters that we have as part of our New Testament. Like, we know all of that. Ananias in that moment had no clue. Right. No clue how it would turn out.
He was just doing the next right thing.
Yes.
Like, that's it.
And I think that is important to remember, like in our journey, whether we're more like a Paul, whether we're more like an Ananias, like, you don't know how it's going to turn out or where exactly that road will lead. Yeah. You can only do that act of obedience in the moment or the next right thing in the moment. And I think that, like, sometimes that bigger picture thought can, like, make us shrink back in and not want to do the thing. Yeah. 'Cause it's scary. like,
well, and for me, so sometimes when I go big picture, when I zoom out, if I'm in a negative headspace, I can get a sense of, well, why does it even matter?
Yeah.
Like if it's a big picture anyway, if God's going to do what God's going to do anyway, then why does it matter if I do this or not? And that's a negative way to look at the situation, because there's a really, really significant chance that there is something in it for me. I just don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Like there is blessings in that, even if the blessing is more faith for the next thing that comes along. Like that's a gift. Like to go through something, receive nothing tangible or seen from it, but knowing that you have the confidence to step into the next thing that you could never had you not gone through that thing before. And so like, the zoom out can be critical to help us gain perspective, but to stay zoomed out doesn't give us that moment to come in and do the little thing that God's asking.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, I think of that story with David Wilkerson is like when he went to that courtroom and made a scene, he had no idea what that was going to lead to.
Right.
You know what I mean? But that was what he was compelled by Christ to do in that moment. And it led him to the next thing and then the next thing and to eventually like larger youth rallies, all this like, and so I think that is what like zoom out does help us remember that it's not just about us, that there could be other people impacted. And I think that is important to know that it's not, because I think sometimes the danger is we only think of those couple little circles, right? Going back to the concentric circles from last week, we stay in those couple ones and we don't ever think about the outside. Yeah. But we can't get so focused on the outside that we forget these little steps along the way. And so, great. Awesome. Well, I hope that some of our personal stories and experiences were helpful for you today. I would say for you is just prayer and to ask God to open up your heart and mind to how he can use you specifically and how he can use others around you to remember not to count them out, because God could easily call them out or call you out. And if he has done it for us and he's done it for countless others, he can do it for you. He can do it for them. So we'll be back here again next week with another extra point and some more practical next steps for your faith journey.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.